Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer, I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please take a second to turn off or silence your phones so we don't have any disruptions. I just have a few quick announcements. So in addition to our in-person summer camp this year, we'll also have a camp to go, which will guide summer campers on a tour through the island. If you're interested, it will be on sale starting June 1st. Contact Thea for more information. Her card is on that table where you signed in. As for upcoming programs, our June brown bag lunch will be with Tammy Kozak, who will discuss her experience taking on a major restoration of her home in the historic district. And then our June 3rd on the 18th will be with Nick Dionis, who will discuss the history of boat building on the island. So that's a little preview, but today we have Marty Hylton. Marty Hylton is the director of the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program and the Center for World Heritage Research and Stewardship. A faculty member of the College of Design, Construction, and Planning, he also oversees the nation's largest applied learning program for historic preservation, the Preservation Institute Nantucket, and its sister program, the Preservation Institute St. Augustine. Marty's research and work addresses multifaceted strategies for documenting, advocating, and preserving endangered heritage sites. So everyone, please welcome Marty.
Thank you, and thank you for having me back. I've met many of you, either in the neighborhood, mostly, I guess, doing field survey work, but see some new faces as well. I want to begin tonight by saying I'm going to kind of walk you through the first phase of the project, which was presented, the outcomes, December 18th here at the museum. So I'm going to just kind of remind you overall our project goals, and then share with you the phase 2 of the project and where we sort of stand. I want to reiterate a couple of things, though, that I think is really important. The first is that we were asked to basically assess the efficacy of the design guidelines that have been developed over time, and we're in no way suggesting that those guidelines go away. We're just looking at how effective they've been and perhaps how to make them better. And also we were charged with maybe also making them a little more user-friendly, if you will. So I wanted to share that. This evening is going to be, I'm going to give the first part of my presentation, and then around the room you've probably seen there's some tables. We have kind of narrowed down based on the survey that was done last fall, conversations within the neighborhood and with the city. We've kind of narrowed down some options for what we think might be a kind of clearer, more straightforward approach to visibility corridors at the Sideyard and kind of mid-lot with the Media Pionis. So we're going to take a little break in kind of the middle of the presentation. I'm going to give you all an assignment, if you'll allow me. We tried to spread things out. I know we're all, I think, probably vaccinated, but still distancing a little bit. And then we'll come back and I'll finish my presentation and Sal will help us tabulate. So I'm not really here to talk about the history of Old Town Fernandina. You know probably as much as I do, if not more. The Law of the Indies, of course, established by the Spanish in 1573 to help oversee the development of urban settings here in the New World. Old Town was platted in 1811, among the last, if not the last, really platted by the Spanish in the United States, or what would become the United States. The New and Towngate streets and South Point were added later in 1821. And the plaza and gridded streets are really the only remains, and therefore when it went on the National Register of Historic Places in 1990, it was really based on that street pattern. Interestingly enough, I'm helping update, I was just saying, the National Historic Landmark District of St. Augustine and their town plan, which is also based, if you've probably everyone's visited St. Augustine, is really based on their plan as well, in addition to archaeology, and they have 33 buildings, 40 structures total that are remnants. But in your case, you really have just it's the plan itself. So Bill Tilson, who's with us today, Professor Emeritus at the University of Florida, prepared the original guidelines in 1999. And then they were updated by an external consultant, Thomas & Associates, in 2013. And then I put up here the guidelines, the contents rather, of the guidelines. And again, you're all probably very familiar with these guidelines. There's a range of diverse resources. There are historic and up to kind of mid-20th century buildings in the neighborhood. But then you also have a range of newer homes done in different styles, including what could be referred to as kind of a Spanish or Mediterranean revival, a contemporary version of that, and what we might call, Florida vernacular or low country style. The two phases, again, we wrapped up the first phase right before Christmas, was the assessment of preservation and development guidelines and their effectiveness. We also did the survey that many of you participated in. I'll remind you about some of the outcomes of that. We've now done completed White Street and Estrada Street laser scanning. I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. The drawing that's over here on the wall is a complete street facade of both sides of those streets. We chose those as the case study, and I'll explain why we chose those streets. So again, we're looking at potential changes to the land development code that could potentially impact the district. Our small matching grant project through the Florida Division of Historical Resources covered a number of areas, including the field work and neighborhood assessment. Again, many of you probably seen me and my colleagues in the field over the last year. Survey by the property owners and the residents specifically of Old Town. Digital documentation through the laser scanning, an impact study, review of the guidelines. I'm also going to be talking about the coastal resilience evaluation was a small component of this project that I will talk about this evening as well. And ultimately, this is going to lead to a new kind of pamphlet that will illustrate the guidelines in a way that we believe will be more user-friendly. That pamphlet is just now being developed. So tonight, again, this is not any kind of conclusion, no things getting voted on. This is really to hear what you have to say and to try to narrow down, again, what we think should be the recommendations. The neighborhood assessment and the impact study. So 158 parcels, 67 occupied, 91 empty. And I should preface this by saying that when we pulled together this data, it was right at the first of the year, and now we are going to be doing some updates because of new construction and also things that have now been approved but have not yet been constructed. 94 existing buildings. This includes accessory units and or garage, outbuildings, 67 main residential structures, again, 27 outbuildings, 2 residents under construction, there was 3 structures, and 19 approved but unbuilt residents. So we not only looked at what was there, but we looked at what was coming, assuming that they will actually be constructed. Last time I was here, I had a larger series of maps, but what you can see, what this illustrates, pre-1900, you have 6 structures, and it's sort of evenly distributed. You hit 2055, and that doesn't include the ones that have been approved. So obviously, as you all know, I'm not saying anything that's not already understood, is that the majority of the built environment has really been over the last 20 years. Again, this sort of shows the distribution of primary residential structures to outbuildings. We have here both approved for demolition. There was 1 approved for swimming pool, approved buildings and additions 20, under construction at the time 3 structures, and existing buildings 94. And again, this will get updated before the final report is submitted to the state. Occupied parcels, again, 67, and empty parcels 91. The digital documentation and the streetscape study. So we used terrestrial laser scanning, and I went into a little more detail about what that was last time. I'm not going to bore you, but everyone who knows me knows I'm a big nerd about it, so I'm happy to talk about laser scanning after. It's really a pretty simple process. You see, this is a laser scanner. Our scanner sends up to 1 million points per second, and it's 2 to 4 millimeters accuracy. So we were able to capture, those drawings are all done from laser scans that were completed over 2 days, 16 hours. That's all it took in the field. So it's an amazing amount of data that we could use to do the assessment, the sort of modeling of the neighborhood. We chose White and Estrada. There's other streets that could have been chosen, but we liked those. Our criteria were really the mix of the older and newer homes, approved and unconstructed homes, available lots for future development that we could model out, north-south and ones at east-west, and then they both bordered the plaza. The AutoCAD Streetscape drawings, as you see here, was part of our deliverable, and modeling of potential changes to guidelines, specifically the mid-lot and side yard corridors is one of the things we focused on, the visibility corridors. And so this is actually a two-dimensional, what's called an orthographic image from the point cloud. It looks kind of pixelated because it is pixelated. It's literally millions of little points, right, that make the form and sort of shape of the building. It also captures trees, obviously. And you can see highly accurate also in terms of elevation change. And that's just some details from the laser scan. And then again, the drawings that we analyzed. So we did a survey that was distributed last fall, and the results were originally reported here in December. And I'll remind you, there were 30 respondents, 17 of which were property owners, 7 in Old Town, 7 of which were just property owners in Fernandina in general, and 6 historic preservation advocates. So you can see it was kind of a mix of both people who live there and people who are interested but maybe not homeowners. Of those that responded, 63% were more than 5 years, majority full-time, and 40% of respondents own more than one property. A lot of different ideas that describe why people, what makes Old Town special to you, the history and charm, obviously. It's a little off the beaten path, smaller neighborhood, the idea of the protected grid and the kind of shell streets, green space, the connection to the waterfront and natural environment, and on and on. I do love the feisty independent spirits. I've met some of you in the neighborhood. I would say that's true. What I found interesting about this, and we kind of went back and forth, and I'm happy to have this discussion tonight too, is whether there really should be an architectural style chosen. Remember, the National Register, the local district, as it's overseen by the HDC, is really about respecting that grid, right, and the kind of form and scale of buildings and how that's impacted, but not necessarily dictating a style. And what I found interesting is that it was more or less split about whether there should or should not be a style. If asked if there's to be a style, what style should it be? And you can see the low country, coastal, and sorry, my PowerPoint's messed up there. The Florida vernacular and the Spanish colonial all ranked pretty high with the modern or contemporary, because there's nothing to say that you couldn't have a more contemporary looking building. So it'll be interesting. Again, it was sort of split on whether there should be an architectural style. I personally, professionally, believe that the kind of the different expressions of architectural character is one of the things that lends Old Town its special character. Also, we talked about accessory dwelling units and should they be rentable. You can see there also pretty evenly split, but more people saying no, although people did have ideas on if they were to be rented, what should happen. And I think one of the biggest concerns was traffic, for sure, and parking. So we also presented a number of options in that survey to look at specifically the mid-lot visibility corridor and then the side yard corridor. We analyzed all of the things that have been approved, over the last 20 plus years in the district. And I didn't include, it was a lot of slides and a lot of information, but what I'm going to present to you now and share with you is what were sort of the top options, and that we refined those options. Is everyone familiar? So you have a question about mid-lot or side yard visibility?
It would be probably useful to describe that because it is confusing because of the medias they have a mid-lot point, but they also have borders. So if you could go through that, that would probably be helpful.
Sure. Let me go back to the plan here really quick. Well, let me do this. I'll just go. So on the media peones, the smaller lots that occur at most of the end of most of the blocks, the idea with the mid-lot visibility corridor is that you maintain 5 feet on either side of that that property line, because these are very small lots and they are often or could be combined. So whether it's one house or 2 garage, what have you, maintaining that 10 feet. You also have your 5-foot visibility corridor, what's sometimes referred to as a setback along the edges of the property as well. And then you have your mid-lot, which we'll talk about on the next slide.
And you have side yard corridors.
Side yard corridor, sorry, yes.
So side yards are to the side. All of the ones that run between the north-south lots have mid-lot visibility corridors, each of those boundaries.
Correct.
And if you have 2 peonia, full peonia that are interior lots, the corridor between the interior lots, one to the north, one to the south, would be also a mid-lot corridor. Is that not true?
Would it be a mid-lot corridor, or is it a side yard corridor?
I'm talking about between 2 peonias, one on White Street, one on the next street over. You know, you've got the backyards jammed together. What's that corridor called?
Yeah, that's still a mid-lot
mid-lot,
corridor
yeah.
between the 2 properties, whether you own them contiguously or not. But there's that 10 feet in there that can't be built on.
Right, so backyard to backyard is a mid-lot corridor.
Right.
And then between the medias.
And between the medias, those are all mid-lot corridors. But side to side, those are called side yard corridors.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, where do your porches figure into your 5 feet?
That's a good question. So I'm going to
Eaten up.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the porches. Well, I'm going to walk you through what are 7 sort of options here. And again, this is based on the input that we received from the survey and our own analysis of the guidelines last fall. So obviously, in this particular instance, you're just keeping the 10 feet and you have your visibility corridor with nothing in between. Are porches allowed? Should they be?
Are they part of the 5 feet?
Are they part of the 5 feet? In my opinion, and there is at least an example or other examples, I think the porches are okay to be a part of the corridor as long as that they're open porches. But you have the say on that. And I'll talk about how we're going to kind of vote on these. So you've got porches.
Marty?
Yes.
So just with Mr. Tilson here, Professor Tilson, what was the Spanish rule? I mean, was there a hard and fast rule that the Spanish had about that? Just from a historical point of view. Did you cross into that 5 feet, or was the law of the Indies have anything in specific about that?
Nothing. And it varies from cities all over the Western Peninsula.
It was just from an informational point of view.
Sure.
Just curious.
So,
See.
yeah, Mr. Green.
How about crossing the lot line with the porch or steps or any of that?
So I'm going to
Property line.
walk you through the 7 options, and we addressed that. I think I'll come right back to your question. So option 1 again is visibility corridor. The question of whether a porch can project, and if so, is that the full 10 feet or 5 feet? The idea of an open breezeway. Again, you'll see this is garage here and not house, right? That's what would allow for the sort of open breezeway. When it becomes an enclosed breezeway, it's then 2 structures, both considered the main house with the garage or ADU separately. And in this particular instance, you would have, transparency would be ideal, both on the front and perhaps the back of this kind of connector piece. What's happening here that's maybe a little bit different, the way the guidelines were originally developed, is it's not really dictating strongly kind of like mass, but it's happening just because you're not allowed to build in these visibility corridors. That's how we're getting the kind of scale of the buildings, if you will, that are occurring, and the kind of rhythm if you look down the street. So in this particular instance, I think, Mr. Green, this might answer you. In crossing over a mid-lot visibility corridor, could you do a bay window? And there's examples of that, or what we call a bump out, right? A portion of the structure, again, that acknowledges the fact that it's going across that mid-lot corridor, and then a recessed porch, another way.
No, I'm talking about taking it across the lot line.
So is that side yard? Side yard. We're going to look at that next. This is our options we put out there for the 7.
So Marty, what you're talking about is not what's in the guidelines today or not. You're talking about what we think maybe should be able to happen in these, right? You're presenting, because a lot of these things you're presenting are not allowable today.
That's right.
You can't have a garage in the front part of the
Right.
lot and things like that.
So I'm just trying to level set. So what you're teeing up here is not what is or isn't allowed today. It's what we as a community think maybe should be allowable going forward.
That's correct.
And since Professor Tilson is here, I think if I understood it right, the reason for the visibility corridors originally was to activate the grid, right? Make it so that you could see the grid. Wasn't that the reason? Right. Okay.
Yeah, just to answer the earlier question, there's no platted city in the Western Hemisphere under the law of the Indians that I know of, that didn't have any buildings from the period of record. So it's an anomaly.
Gotcha.
Could you read, please?
This particular image that I'm seeing shows that recessed porch at the media peonia split.
Correct.
We haven't seen that. So there was already houses that do cross the media peonia. I own one. So,
Right. That's again this confusion I think that exists around mid-lot. That's called a mid-lot. Am I getting that right? Mid-lot corridor.
Right.
yeah, so that's you're not seeing through.
Right.
Like in my house.
Right.
You're not seeing through it. But are you talking about that same kind of thing applying to across two adjacent full peonias?
So we're going to talk about the side yard
That's a different
next.
case.
That's
That's side yard corridor.
Okay.
But to clarify again, we're asked we're asked to revisit these guidelines and to see what we thought were working and effective and not. Overall,
I'm confused a second. I hear media peonia and I hear midlot. They are both synonymous, correct?
that is correct.
Okay, I just want to make
They
sure.
are- They are the same.
Okay.
They're one and the
They're
same.
However, if you own, in the case of two full peonias, backyard to backyard, there's still a mid-lot between backyard to backyard. Of
That-
full.
I call that a mid-block.
Yeah, but that's not what they call it. That's the problem.
Good. Okay, let's come back to a moment. And what we've been asked to do, overall, we thought the guidelines, the team that did the evaluation of the guidelines that Professor Tilson originally developed, have been very effective. In the areas that they had not been, we focused in on the mid-lot, which is the media peonia, and we focused in on the side yard, which I'll talk about in just a minute, Mr. Green. We felt like there's a lot of variation. We talked a little bit more about that in December, right? Of all of the range of ways that it's been approached. We want to narrow that range to fewer options is what we're suggesting. And that's what you're seeing here. Are these the right directions? Some of it has already occurred, or a variation of it. Some of it is a bit new or different. But this was the one area that we felt like could be made stronger in the guidelines.
Would your changes address the massing?
Right now, we're not suggesting changing the massing. Because again, as I stated, the massing actually occurs. The other complicated piece of this is because the way that different lots can be put together, right? So to think through every possible scenario is a challenge. But the massing is occurring because of the restrictions with the visibility corridors. That's what helps you get to the mass, the actual mass of the
Well,
building
in the
itself.
example you're showing, it's not doing anything to control the mass.
It's, well, it could be a longer building for sure. Yes.
Another question for Professor Tilson. The 45% rule, was that part of the Indies, or is that a modern ruling that we put on the land?
That's a contemporary rule. It's not part of the law.
Because you're only supposed to take, let's say a Peona is 4,600 square feet, and I forget the number, you take 45% of that, and that's all you're allowed to put concrete on.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, just because there seems to be a lot of ambiguity against, is it a porch or a carport? It's where you put concrete, or is it only where you put walls in concrete?
Right.
And to Bill's point, does that play into the massing or not?
All right, what's massing?
Yeah, define massing.
Massing is the actual volume of the building itself, right?
Now I've got what that going on.
The structure.
Building Cadillac houses on Volkswagen lots.
Okay.
But isn't the 45% for air conditioned space?
For controlled space.
Okay, so
Yes.
that's different.
So the guidelines, I'll address that.
Yeah.
For the guidelines, the way they address it is connecting elements are not included in that in the calculation of the 45%. So, and it defines specifically connecting elements being porches, carports, open breezeways, things like that, that are an indoor-outdoor space that can be part of the house and can be roofed over, but aren't an indoor space.
They aren't conditioned, I think it specifically calls out. They're not conditioned
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah, no, none of them would be conditioned, and it specifically calls out what types they are. So things like porches and things like that. So the house could be bigger or take up more of the lot than the 45% at current time with connecting elements, if you had a number of connecting elements.
Well, when you sit down and discuss that, does anybody discuss the problem it creates?
And what is the problem you think that it creates?
Well, there's no place to be outside. I know you can be on the porch, but you aren't going to get your feet dirty because there's no place outside to get your feet dirty. Because you're either going to be getting in the car, or you're going to be sitting on the porch, or you're going to be in the right of way, or you're going to be on somebody else's property. I just don't think you've thought about this in a realistic living there situation. And if you put a house on every one of those lots, and if you continue to allow them to put Cadillac houses on Volkswagen lots, eventually all hell is going to break loose in Old Town.
Already had.
Yeah, but you just cannot continue to live up each other's nose like this
I think
and not have it break loose.
That's the point of evaluating the guidelines every few years. So that's why
It's getting bad.
that's why we're here.
And that loses a lot of historic ambiance too.
we've gone from 1-car homes to 2, 3, 4-car homes.
Yes.
So if the porch is pushed to that 5-foot line or over it, now people are parking in the right of way or on the side right of ways. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more is, and I don't want to blame the construction guys, folks have to park somewhere, and I love what they're doing, but it just adds more and more people to parking in the right of ways.
Sure.
Well, they're not parking in the right of way. They don't even know what a right of way is. That's where they put their trees and their flowers and their blocks and their rocks and their everything, but they don't put cars in them.
Mr. Green's has his hand up.
This, all of this revisiting the guidelines and all that's all well and good, that's cool. You say it's gonna make it simpler. But my only concern with the whole thing is, making it simpler is one thing, but, keeping the opinions out of what the guidelines is when people say, go to build a house. Well, I don't really like this. Or the flavor of the day might be brick chimneys. We'd like to see you put a brick chimney up. And then a month later, somebody goes before, let's say, the board, and they got a fireplace. Nothing said about the chimney. There's a stucco. That's the big issue. I think everybody who, I'm not going to beat around this bush. I sit here and try to keep my mouth shut, and I'm not going to do it. Everybody that is built up there has done their level best. And it's our money. The city doesn't give us a penny, not one penny, to turn that place into what it's been turned into. Okay? And we've been pulled through the ringers, And then, like one of the meetings said, it's actually turned neighbor against neighbor. You see this guy build a house, say, well, man, how'd you get away with that? So, you can do anything you want to these guidelines, but that's not the problem. The city knows the problem. Anybody here wants to agree with me again? If you don't, that's fine too.
It is true that for some reason, some people go with this idea, and then the next group that comes in, family group, the rules change.
Exactly.
And it's very disheartening because, we've saved our money, worked our way, and this is our dream house. And they said we could do this. Well, we read the whole manual and we did it the way they said that, but we can't cross and we can't connect this. So I'm taking my groceries in the rain, but so-and-so down no, they can go and make whatever they want to.
And I think you brought it up earlier. The guidelines were not designed to give a style. If I wanted to build an all-glass house in the middle of Old Town, I should be allowed to build an all-glass house. But yet, when we go in front of the board, that's not the flavor you get. You basically get what people used to call the white cracker house. That's what you have to build. And even my architect, when we sat down, said, you have to put hardy board, you have to have this, you've got to have framed out windows. But yet, what we've just heard earlier was there is no style guideline. That is not allowed. So I go back to what's been talked about. It's like, well, okay, let's get the guidelines for the corridors. Let's figure out the mid-lots and all this stuff, which you've been tasked to do.
Right.
But we also need to understand that those guidelines need to start taking out what style you're allowed to build. If I want to build an all-black house and put fire red chimneys on it of whatever material, those guidelines should not be telling me what to do.
And I would like to add one more thing to that. Everybody that is built that I know, we've worked hand in hand with South Camella. We didn't go before that board shooting from the hip. Okay? This man is being paid by the taxpayers. Us, the people in here. Okay? In my opinion, you should not have to go up there like the Gestapo is coming after you. If there's something wrong and Sal says you're good to go, the fight shouldn't be with me. The fight should be with Sal, not with me. Well, why are you fighting with me? I'm going to that man for advice. Okay? He's the one that walks us through this. I myself worked with him for a year. I felt he done an excellent job. Excellent. I really do, as far as working with me and my wife. But then, you're marched up there to a podium. I'm sorry, buddy, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. We're American citizens here. We're American citizens. We're not Fernandina Beach puppets. We made, that place, and I'll tell you something else that made that place, is the people who've lived there for years. You talk about history. Talk to the people who've been there for years and years and years. It'll totally blow your mind.
No, I've had these conversations, I think when it comes to I think there's a couple of big questions here. I'm just going to put it out there. Sorry, sound going off the rails here, but I guess one big question is, why is there? I started this by saying we're not suggesting getting rid of the guidelines, but when we're talking about these visibility corridors or setbacks and how much percentage of a lot, that in the land development code could be approved without it going to the HDC, which is focused more on the style. Not saying that they're not also very much verifying that you're adhering to the current guidelines when it comes to visibility corridors. But I think that is a big question, is if everyone or the majority of you are in agreement that there's no specific architectural style, then it does beg that question.
Yeah, just one thing about the architectural style. You showed some data earlier where it was more or less a 50-50 split, where people, some felt there should be, some felt there shouldn't. I was one of the people that feel that we should have architectural review. But the way the question was worded, it said an architectural style, so I said no. So I was on the no side of that ledger. Meanwhile, that's because I thought it said and. It didn't limit it, it just said and. And I certainly didn't want it to be, some sort of a development where there was only one. And to me means one architectural style. So I answered no. So I'm in the side of the equation there. So I think there was an opportunity for people to misunderstand that question and come down more on the side of no, there shouldn't be, when there probably was a desire to do it. And I think it would be good if through, I don't know what the next steps for this whole thing are, but through this process, given that it seems like that's a, kind of an even split, perhaps, kind of a thing,
right?
That would be a good thing for somebody to well, I don't know if it's part of the scope of your grant or not, but to really kind of explore with the community. Because I understand exactly what Bob's saying, and I understand what Tim's saying, but there's a bunch of people who also think having some architectural consistency, no offense, but I don't want to live sitting next to a black house with orange chimneys.
That was just an example.
No, I know, but you could have it, right? If you take it, you could
There's a
have
lot of places on this island that if you want to go live in an HOA where they
Right.
dictate what you're allowed to build, but I think that's why a lot of people here ended up in Old Town, is to escape the HOA rules.
Yes.
Yes.
True.
You can't have a boat here, or you can't have your trash can out past 10 hours after that's what we've moved the character of Old Town to, is because the island has become such an HOA haven. We don't want that.
Yeah, the counter.
I agree, Alex, the Black House was a bad example.
Well, I'm just saying that the counter to that is I was with you. I don't want to live in an HOA, but I felt protected by the guidelines to avoid the black house with the red chimneys and whatever. So, to me, throwing the guidelines out completely and the approach to style oversight is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I wouldn't want to go there.
I know, we kind of all like the boathouse.
Well, that's true, but that was pre-existing.
Before, Mr. Green, was there another comment here?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just in a passing comment, when it came to the survey, I don't understand why almost 35% of it was advocates of Old Town. I'd like to see the people that have a house there or are in the game, property owners or homeowners that live there especially, make these decisions, not people that don't live there or have a hand in the game.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yeah, Mr. Green?
To Alex's point, I get what he's saying, about the black house, orange house, with blue chimney, this, that, or the other. But on the flip side of that, we're paying a lot of taxes up there. A lot of taxes if you live there, and architecturally, I personally, if that's what kind of house you want, that's what kind of house you could have, if it's not absurd. But there again, I hate to do it, but I'm gonna go right back to the board in White Street, okay? If you come in White Street, okay, you look, there's some houses that's right up on the street, except the one behind me. It's pushed back. There again, I don't care where it is. I could care less. But I've heard, we would like the houses up further to White Street. And then when this guy goes to build a house, it's a small house, so it'll be no problem with it pushed back. So, like I said, you can do whatever you want to with these guidelines. The people's not the problem. I'm telling you, the people's not the problem. You know, if you got it right there in front of you, you know, the windows, the hardy board, this, that, the other thing, then it is what it is. But when you got well, I'll just say it, a board up there, and this one's got this opinion, and this one's got this opinion. And let me ask you another question. If you've got 5 board members, and 3 say yes and 2 say no, shouldn't the argument be between those 3 and those 2? There's no argument there. It's yes or it's no. You know, so you can't win. You can't win. And people feel intimidated and at the mercy of that board. Okay? I'm not going to be intimidated by it. I'll say it straight up. You know, and it's not right. It's not right. That is not what this country was founded on. I mean, the history and everything, that's great. That's fine. And you all said it's the land plat. Let it go with that. But the more you throw into this, the more empowerment you're going to give other folks to make our life miserable.
Well, I'm not usually in the business of making people's life miserable, unless, unless you're one of my students, PhD students. But I think that, I think that's, you and I have had this conversation in your yard, and it's a valid point. Not what I've been charged to do, and not what I have control over. I'm sure if there is a route in the city to make a formal complaint about the process, and you can shake your head or say it, but I'm just saying I don't have any control over that. All I can do is try to help make the guidelines, that's what I've been tasked to do, easier to use and a little more straightforward so that there is less ambiguity. And I'd like to come back and say when it comes to the guidelines, and I threw it out there, I was like, okay, well, don't do the HDC review. I personally, I'm an architect. I've been studying this. You know, I'm 50 years old. I'm mid-century now. And I've seen a lot of neighborhoods. And I walked out of there for the first time with Professor Tilson and Sal. And didn't I say, I was like, this is a really extraordinary community. And the type of architecture that's there, the new architecture is, in my opinion, above and beyond what happens in a lot of places. So if it were me and I wanted to buy there, and I guess I deal with a lot of HDC boards, so maybe I'm not intimidated by much either, Mr. Green, but I would choose to live there, absolutely, because of the character of the neighborhood and its history and what you've tried to achieve with honoring that grid. So I'm not suggesting that design guidelines go away. I'm just saying it does need to be made clear.
Right, clear, yeah.
Simpler.
Everybody can agree with that.
So that's what we're tasked with doing.
I'm not newer, and I may be redundant in my questioning, but how many board members sit on this HTC board? 5? And is there a way that we know their backgrounds? Obviously, I know some of them, but their historical, what their knowledge of that is, and what are their terms? Are they 3 years?
Available online.
Huh?
They're, I'd have to look it up. They're 3-year terms, I think.
3-year terms? Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. And they're
I
rotating
thought you said
terms.
life. I was like, what?
Supreme Court.
And we're not beating up to messengers.
And that information's online.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what? I get beat up all the time. It's fine. I'm good. No, I know it's not. I've had these conversations. I have taken the time to have these conversations in the field with people, and I've listened and I've reported back, and it's going to be part of the findings. But how we come to kind of a consensus is what I'm grappling with.
So you report
right
back to the board after these meetings?
So I think what our goal what we'd like to do is once this kind of draft report's completed, that'll be made available and for comment, but it needs to be presented at an HDC
And are those
meeting.
board meetings open for the public?
They are.
Okay.
So-
Even this report back, like it's not a 9 o'clock in the AM
They're
board
the
meeting?
third Thursday
somewhere?
of every month at 5 p.m.
Okay.
at City Hall. And so the next step would be, once the report is generated, we will put it up online, and that'll probably happen before the next actual step, which would be a workshop of the Historic District Council, where they can then read the report and discuss in an informal, non-voting session with citizens what those recommendations are and what their thoughts are on any changes that might need to be made or what the will of the citizens are.
And are you planning to do this type of a grant in another area of downtown? Have you done that before?
Downtown, so we're focusing, we do these about every 5 to 10 years, and downtown's actually next on the list. So the downtown guidelines will be revisited next year.
Will be done, this one will be done?
Yes.
All these decisions will be made? The board wants all these decisions made by next year?
For Old Town, we're hoping that by the end of 2021, if there are any changes coming, that they would be there. We will have the document, though, created this summer that has the new guidelines and the visuals for whatever is thought about.
And even though the grant wraps up, you know, I'm glad you think Sal's great because he was one of my students. But I think that, you know, the University of Florida, we're here. It doesn't mean that it's the end. It just means that the grant deliverables get turned in. I've got grant coordinators here. And that, you know, there's still going to be time, I think, to really make sure that they're as good as they can be.
So, Sal, one more question about this. Once you do wrap up the guidances for Old Town, guidances or recommendations?
So the recommendations will come from this. Then they'll go to an HTC workshop to be discussed and have more public discussion on them. At that point, the HTC will then decide if they want to bring it to an actual voting HTC meeting and make formal changes.
Will it be emailed out to us before the workshop?
Yes. Traditionally, everybody gets a notice within 300 feet. When we do a workshop or something like that, all residents get it, no matter how far away you are.
Or will the report come out? Will we get a copy of the report?
Ahead of time.
That's a good question. We can consider sending out a postcard if that's how everybody would like to receive that.
We'd like to see the report on, you know, on the email, you know, the whole report.
Or a link to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be on the website. It'll be a link. The full report will be on the website. But I know not everybody checks the website frequently to see what's going on. So if everybody thinks that a postcard would be the way to, like they'd like to be informed that the report is up on the website and how to get to it, we can do that.
Yeah, and Sal, one other thing. I mean, I think it's great that, you know, you want to do this with all the community involvement, but you have to remember that there are folks that aren't here today because it's Memorial Day weekend and they're off visiting family, and some people are snowbirds that have permanent homes. And so, you know, when it was a necessity that you did some of the HTC meetings via Zoom, it wasn't ideal. Of course, it would be ideal if everybody could be in the same room, but I would strongly ask you to consider allowing people to participate remotely. Companies do it all the time, and you want to get as much feedback as you can.
So legally, the legal requirements are the governor's executive.
Sorry, I'm talking about the workshop.
Yes, so workshops will be, it's the one thing we can.
Right, those aren't quasi-judicial.
Yes, and so we can do that, and we will still be doing that as far as workshops. But when they actually go to vote, that will not be virtual.
We have someone been very patient with their hand up.
Is what you're trying to show us here, the mid-media marker?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
And I'll just make one more comment about this meeting is online. And it'll be up.
Yeah, it's being streamed right now.
Yeah, we've got 7 people watching remotely.
Okay. And how long will it be up after?
I can put it on YouTube and it can be up forever.
Will you do that? Will you do that?
Yeah.
Okay, when we can have that online?
By next week.
Okay.
But those folks can't really participate.
No, not in the interactive workshop.
But if they have comments, they can certainly email Sal.
And there's also a chat.
That's right. There's a chat thing there?
Yeah, there was in December. We had quite a few more folks because of COVID who were streaming in. Yeah. And all of the encounters, you know, all the discussions that I've had in the neighborhood, we documented those as well. And things that were said. Again, I've reported back on everything. So I think there's been we've made a good effort, I think, to make it an engagement, engage with the residents. So let me do this. I want to walk through the side yard visibility corridor options, and then I want to go ahead and do the interactive component. Similar to what you saw with the media peone or the mid-lot visibility corridors, the idea here again is to simplify. Is it when you're crossing that line and acknowledging that 5 feet on either side or the 10 feet, is it simply left empty? If it's a porch, again, not everyone's for that. If it's a porch, is that fine? What does that look like? Does it need to be the full 10 feet, within 5 feet? And then keeping it, again, trying to be simple, the idea of the open or enclosed breezeways.
The assumption there is you own both lots.
That's true.
Is it different if you don't own the adjoining lot and how far your porch roof could come over?
That's a good question. Yeah.
To be decided?
To be decided.
Well, I thought the LDC specified you're only allowed a 2.5 foot encroachment or 2 foot encroachment
Stairs.
into a
Into the setback.
Stairs, yeah.
Not separate. No, I'm not talking about stairs. I'm talking about porches. Not porches. Roof, gables,
Chimneys. There are some elements that can encroach into setback.
and that's already defined, right?
Yes.
So is part of the
24
scope
inches.
of this? Because it's a great question, Bob. Is part of the scope of this to talk about being able to go the full 5 feet even if you don't own the adjoining lot, or are we just talking about cases where you
But if it's in the LDC, if it's in the building code, then that's a SAL, it's a building thing, it's really not an HDC thing at all.
I'm just trying to make sure people understand the exercise we're doing. Right? The exercise we're doing is, like you said, if you own both lots, right?
We specifically, that's what we were looking at when the lots are combined. We're not looking at the situation that you're talking about, the encroachment of.
And currently, it would be, you'd still have if you didn't own the lot next to you, you'd still have that 5 foot on the side.
Right.
And you could encroach per the LDC 24 inches with chimneys, the eaves, things like that.
Then why did I have to move my garage back? Because the overhang on the side of the garage was into the easement, an unusable easement, because a huge tree is there, and I had to shrink my porch.
That's a difference with your particular property having an easement on it, so nothing can encroach into the easement. The encroachment can be into your setback. So that's a different private property issue.
I pulled this out because I didn't know if I was going to share it or not. So the question about should there be, an HDC review, that's what this sheet is about. And what I would ask then, since you're all here, to clarify, not only that, I'll draw a line through it, but I'll say, should there be a style or styles?
Or styles.
Right, or styles. You can say yes or no on the styles. And if you want to even be specific, there's pins. You can write whatever you want to. You can say Professor Hylton. Not good at what he does. Whatever you want to write. You can put whatever you want to. But
Pittsburgh Steelers house.
yeah. Yes. So I will create the sheet. What I would like to do though is to be specific about who's here that are residents and who here are non-residents, because you're going to get different color stickers depending on. So if you're a resident, and I'll do it on the honor system, you can take a sheet of green and a sheet of red. Green means you like it, and red means you don't like it. So when you go around, you can put the green on the things you like. You don't have to like, maybe you only like one thing. You can put all your green stickers on one thing. Fine by me. That's the exercise.
Resident of Old Town.
Old Town.
Not
Resident of Old Town.
Beach is the city.
Those of you who are residents in the city but not Old Town, you got different stickers.
What about property owners who aren't yet residents? That's like a middle ground.
I would still say they need, if you own that property, as far as I'm concerned, you're a resident.
You own a piece of the grid.
Right, okay, yeah, I just wanted to be
If you
clear.
have multiple properties, do you get multiple stickers?
I like that. Sure, you take as many stickers as you want. Let's start with 20. These are, the green and the red are for Old Town residents or property owners. Anyone who can
We're gonna go vote.
who can go through the process. Those of you who are residents of Fernandina, Amelia Island, but not Old Town, you've got the blue and the yellow. Yellow being, yes, I like it, blue being no,
Why
okay?
are they here? I don't understand. I thought this was just Old Town residents voting on Old Town. Why do outsiders have to say?
Because it's Fernandina.
You need to grab.
I don't get
I think I can answer the question is why is it beyond residents? Well, the fact is a lot of people love history and this historic place, and we're at a history museum too, which is part of the requirement that it be a sort of public meeting as well. But I would encourage they may not live in Old Town, they may not have a say, that's why we're as strong as say, but I still think that we should hear from all residents.
They may buy in.
They could buy in, for sure.
We're joining.
Yeah.
Marty, while they pass this out, I have another question.
Sorry, can we're still having some discussion, go ahead.
Just, someone had brought up the HTC meetings, and we all know this, but that HTC are the Old Town guidelines different than the city?
Yes.
Because the HTC is covering both sets, and are they truly told you gotta keep Old Town in mind when you're looking at Old Town, and city only when you're looking at city, and there's no gray area, or is there an expected middle ground to both? Because that's a lot of work, than if you've got to separate your brain for everything.
Yeah, and there's a CRA which has different guidelines against you.
Well, no, the building department has to do with the building department.
No, they're actually the CRS, downtown,
Just, because, or does the HDC separate, and we have the Old Town HDC members, and then we have the city?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to get a little control. It's 6:27. I'm gonna give us about 13 minutes if we need that. I'll kind of see, but I'll give you about 10 minutes. Let's see if that's enough time to go around. If not, I can give you more. I will keep this at the podium. Is the big question about a review and style or styles that you would like to see. Again, those of you who are Old Town residents or property owners, green and red, green being you like it, red being you don't, you can distribute your stickers, you can put them all on one choice if that's how you feel.
Tweaked to the point where a property owner who wants to build a house can simply go in and see you and the building department and get all that they need and go on and build their house?
So that's the question on the podium,
This is the big question.
Because that is how it should be. They shouldn't have to go see anybody once they've seen you in the building department. That's right. That is the goal.
Yeah.
But all the changes should not be incorporated with it, because we had to go back to the architect multiple times, spending multiple dollars to get things fixed after we were told it would be fine. Well, it wasn't fine, because the board didn't like it. That's where I have a problem, because we had to spend so much extra money, even though we thought we were conforming. And now here we are 15 months later, having moved in, and we see all these other people doing stuff that we weren't allowed to do.
Right.
That's not right.
Right here.
Sorry.
And you can certainly put comments on the sheets as well. That would be appreciated. Yes, Mr. Green. Before we break, we'll take one more comment if I can have everyone's attention.
I guess the final vote on all this goes back to the board.
One more.
The HTC board. You know, ain't any of them guys on that board pays my taxes. I could live with something a whole lot better if the vote went to the people than 5 people on a board. What would be wrong with that? If you own one of those lots, what would be wrong with the people voting on it versus 5 people and not all of them live? You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, and the whole reason I'm here is because we've done this survey. I've had these conversations with quite a few of you. We're doing this exercise tonight. That's hard data. There's no disputing what you said in that survey and what's being said tonight. So all I can do is report that back and say, here are what the people who live in Old Town, our own property, say, and here's what we think recommendations can be done based on that. That's what, at that point, that's the control I have.
Why is there a committee anyway? Is there some kind of mandate that there has to be this committee that comes after Sal has reviewed it and approved it, and then we give it before the committee and they say, I don't think I like that. Come back next month.
Yeah.
You know, why is there a committee to begin with? That's a problem I have. And why couldn't I just go back to Sal and say, okay, Sal, they didn't like this, let's fix this? No, it don't work that way.
Well, it
They
is
make
part.
it about as hard as they can on a person.
Yeah. It is part of an ordinance, right? That it is part of the law here in Fernandina, that there is a historic districts commission or council.
Okay, so, I'm hearing from my neighbors and, and I certainly have met with a lot of them and I understand the difficulties a number of my neighbors have had, without a doubt. I'm hearing this and I'm going, it's true, back and forth with HDC and all that. Maybe I was a lucky one. I went through the process and it went rather smoothly. And in spite of that, though, and I'm an engineer, so I tend to take the guidelines and I tear them apart. And I built houses as when I was younger, so I'm fortunate that I have construction skills and all that. With that, going through the guidelines clearly, and Sal, you and I had this conversation several years ago, and I went back, you sent me over to the Land Development Code. The Land Development Code is definitely a lot clearer. This is what you can and can't do. Whereas the guidelines, the way, this is input for you, on the way the guidelines are written, it's more suggestive, more interpretive.
It's subjective.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So even though I would say I took and I digested the guidelines, and then when I went about trying to design my house, I tried to think, well, am I trying to not just conform to the guideline, what was the guideline trying to tell me? More of a story in the history of the neighborhood. And so I approached my design in that manner. And in spite of that, when I went through the HDC, there were board members that were debating things that should change when I'm in the middle and actually had followed, like my neighbors, the guidelines and was well conforming. And that ended up getting sorted out and settled out and all that. So, but I think Sal's point a few years ago to me that with these guidelines, if they are modified, are more in a codified language of what you can and can't do would probably be meaningful, because it would take away some of that ambiguity that we're experiencing there, because that's what I'm hearing, to your point.
So I think that, and I hear exactly what you're saying, and that is a big part of our mandate. What I do appreciate about the guidelines, and I'm not just saying this for Professor Tilson's benefit, but it is the fact that they're not as prescriptive as I've seen other guidelines in other historic districts. So the ambiguity actually allows for kind of the diversity that I appreciated for the first time I went. So you have to, it's a fine line, that has to be.
Personally, I like them. I think
agree.
the guidelines are a good thing because I don't want the glass box. And that's one of the reasons I built there, and the way I built is because I'm not worried about the glass box being built like we have done on South Fletcher Street. You see some beautiful homes on South Fletcher, and then next to it, there's something.
But I just want everybody to understand, in the guidelines and the LDC today, you could build that house in Old Town.
Yeah, there is nothing to stop
as long as it met the setbacks.
Yeah.
But the HDC has been a good control.
But the HDC isn't looking at a particular style. When you build a house, you come to the HDC and say, this is the style of house I want to build. And then they look for consistency that, okay, architecturally, it's not a hodgepodge of things, it makes sense within that style. But if somebody wanted to do a contemporary house like that, it would be approved through the board.
Don't let them know.
Yeah, really.
So I'm gonna have to cut us off if we're gonna, because we're gonna come back to this, but now it's 6:34. Let's take 10 minutes. You can start in the back. There are 4 sheets. There's 7 sheets. Don't forget the podium is now such a focus. I have one part of the presentation while Sal is tabulating up the results of this interactive session. I have we've also been tasked, the University of Florida, we do a lot with historic communities and coastal resilience, issues of flooding and sea level rise and erosion. So let's talk about a bigger picture and challenge that's coming. So, we did laser scanning, digital imaging, not only of White and Estrada, but the entire embankment there along Marine Street. And we've had the opportunity, these are preliminary results, this is one of the last parts of our study, but we began with aerial photographs, as many as we could find, going back as far as we could find. In conversation with Professor Tilson, I think we'll even kind of compare it to some of the earliest historic maps, like the 1857 map. We'll go back and see if we can kind of align these. But what we were looking at specifically is the change. This is the plaza, just so everyone understands, right? And Estrada and White Street, right? And the marina's over here. So we're looking at changes in the coastline is what we were mapping over time. And you can see this next one, I had some questions about 1969. We're doing a little research because you can see going from 43, again, this is the plaza and your embankment. I should say the embankment ranges, again, our laser scanner is 2 to 4 millimeters accuracy. So the embankment ranges from about 14 feet to 17 feet, a little over sea level. So what you're seeing here in this 1943, right, you can see some beach there. When you go to 69, and again, we're looking back at sort of storms that happened, and it might have also been the time of day with a really high tide that was happening, but you have very little shoreline going. In 1994, this is a story, the shoreline there, of kind of accreting and also eroding. We're now looking back at records of also interventions that might have happened, right? So we're mapping it and just what we're seeing visually, but then what might have also, in terms of like kind of beach renourishment sort of projects or activities. This is your 04 coastline, and you can see there's a kind of an interesting indent there. Your 2019 coastline, and then we're comparing. We had 2 from 2019, and then we're looking at all. So this gives you a sense of, again, how much that coastline has changed. Why is this important? Obviously, it's simple. Is that is your buffer, right, against water and erosion and storm surge and longer-term sea level rise. What happens along the shoreline here. And we looked at NOAA is really the gold standard. That's what most municipalities around the country use for their sea level rise data. And it's been, accepted sort of by many scientists. And what I want to preface this, because I talked about this issue of sea level rise in Florida now for a long time, and climate change. And, it doesn't really, regardless of why you might be thinking it's happening, I can tell you it is happening. I've lived in Florida for 14 years. The 7 worst flooding events in St. Augustine have been in the last 10. The 7 worst flooding events in Cedar Key have been in the last 10. And so we also work on Nantucket, 7 worst flooding events in the last 10 years. So regardless, again, of why you might think it's happening. And so we looked at the intermediate high is what we're ended up mapping. It's not the best case scenario or worst case scenario as projected by NOAA and sea level rise, but it's middle of the road. And what you're going to see in the images of the water rising is high tide twice a day, not a king tide, not the worst high tide, not the lowest high tide, but we average the high tide. We're fortunate for Fernandina to have, the data is actually tracked through a tidal gauge that's actually not right off of the coast of Old Town, but more towards downtown. That tide gauge, every 7 minutes, is collecting data, and it's been in place for a few decades. We had amazing data to look at.
It's the oldest one on the East Coast.
It is. It's really remarkable. So what you're seeing here in the intermediate high at 3.79 feet, this is 10 years, you're beginning to see, you're basically already to the base of the elevation change. Everything that's there now is covered at high tide twice a day. And you're beginning to get encroachment, on either side. That's 10 years. And then by 2050, 4.71 feet, again, because you have that 4 to 17 feet above sea level and that distinct elevation change there, it's not the impact. It's going to begin to erode the embankment, but it's really water coming in from the other side. So by the time you get to 2100, you even have like Egan's Creek Lane is underwater, sort of visually. So So we've done studies like this in Nantucket and St. Augustine, and when we first started doing this and using the laser scan data, I said when you see these, you can panic, right? And then but once you panic, you either freeze or you begin to problem solve. And I think that there are approaches to resilience. Resilience is defined as the ability of built and natural environments to keep adapting to existing and emerging threats such as coastal hazards. And there are three broad approaches: to protect against it, to try to build a barrier, and I'll give examples of that, or to accommodate the water. The Dutch, who've been doing this for a very long time and have extremely sophisticated infrastructure systems, are now giving up on those and saying we have to learn to live with water in a different way. And last, of course, is retreat. I'm going to assume at least some of you chose, at least with, even by 2100, you can see you're on relative high ground as compared to other parts of the island. I'm not saying that there are not areas of your neighborhood that will be impacted, but the majority of the neighborhood, this is intermediate high. I should also preface that by saying we're more towards the high is what's happening. And I also want to say that with sea level rise, it's not like a steady increase. There are years where it jumps dramatically. It's almost like an EKG kind of thing. It often has to do with La Nina, El Nino and La Nina. When it comes to protect, Venice, Italy just launched the Mosgate, which are 30 years in the making. It did protect the city from flooding for the first time in October 19. It was over $1 billion US, and a lot of that was probably Italian corruption, but that was all right. Charleston, South Carolina, it's still out there, I believe, on the table. It's been highly debated. The Corps of Engineers, if you've been to the battery in Charleston, is talking about building an 8-10-foot wall to protect the battery. These solutions, though, are not seen as best practices really anymore, but it's, again, living with water and kind of nature-based solutions. In Nantucket, where we do our summer program, the highest point on the island is a little village called Sconset. It's about 100 foot above sea level. Extreme erosion started happening after the worst storm, the perfect storm, the no-name storm. But the perfect storm was the book and the movie. Erosion started happening, and it's only accelerated over time. It was very controversial, but neighbors came together and ended up getting approved these geotextile tubes at the base of the cliff, and indigenous sort of grasses with this netting that's biodegradable. These are the kind of approaches I showed this because I thought it was a great example for Old Town in your situation there, at least next to the plaza. These types of approaches are being seen as more valid. And the idea of the living shoreline, I think the shore keepers, is that the name, are already doing the oyster beds. This is exactly in alignment with what most communities are proposing, these kind of living shorelines and introducing things like oyster beds as protection to kind of absorb the storm surge. So again, I was just tasked with not making strong recommendations about what shouldn't be done, but just to kind of run the data and do the analysis so that you know what the impacts are potentially, okay? And I'll come back to this one.
Yeah, they're in order from greatest to least. There's that one, and here's mid-lot, and here's side yard.
So if you'll bear with me really quick, I can share with you the results. This question that I put out there, do you agree with making Fernandina Old Town design guidelines part of the Land Development Code and eliminate the Historic District Council review? 4 of you agree to remove the review, but 18 supported keeping the HTC review. And these are all Old Town residents. Yes to style or styles, 20 of you said yes, there should be a defined style. 13 said no style, which is pretty much what we said in December.
You know what?
I think it's flipped,
Sarah,
actually.
I think we did that wrong.
I think we, yeah.
Some of us right here were like,
We did.
we didn't read it. I thought it was just red or green, so I just put green down. And I didn't read, and that's my bad.
I didn't even
I've
see
heard
it.
many of other people too.
Yeah.
So that's not a valid, that's not.
We can redo it.
So we could raise hands or something.
Yeah, let's do something.
Yeah, we can just raise hands.
Do a show of hands.
All right, how many, well, of specific Old Town residents or property owners, how many of you agree with eliminating the HDC review? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people. And how many of you feel like the HDC review should remain? And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. 10 people. So 15 to 10. How many of you should believe that believe there should be a style or styles dictated? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And how many of you believe there should be no style? And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So 15 are saying to do away with the HDC review. Again, 10 saying it should remain. And of the styles, it was 17 yes to style, 7 no style. Style or styles. In order of...
Hey, Marty, I'll just bring up that there are a bunch of people who texted me that they couldn't use the chat.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of people who couldn't weigh in.
Can you text them and tell them to email Sal?
Yeah, I did.
Please, thank you. And let me just quickly put these up. The enclosed breezeway, in terms of this, actually 21 residents basically agreed with this and 14 disliked it. And that was the top pick. This is in order of most chosen to least chosen.
This is for the mid-lot or the?
This is for the mid-lot, Media Peonia.
And this was the most popular.
This was the most popular. The next most popular by 20 residents, yes, 4 no, was the open breezeway. So the open and closed breezeways. The next.
Marty,
Yep.
when you say it's the most popular,
It was the one that people chose the most. They put the most green dots.
the most, okay, what about the number of reds?
The number of reds for, the number of reds for the enclosed breezeway was 14. So 21 residents said yes, 14 said no.
Is that also the most popular disagree?
Might be the most popular disagree. So a little bit controversial. Good point. Then with the open breezeway, it was 21 residents liked and only 4 disliked the open breezeway.
So that one wins.
And then just having a visibility corridor and nothing was 16 residents to 13. That was sort of split. The porch, there were only 9 residents that liked it, 17 that disliked it.
That's not the right picture.
I think it is. It's because the next one is the bay window. And there was 8 residents liked it, 19 disliked it. And then lastly is what we call the bump out, for lack of a better word. 7 residents liked it, 22 disliked it.
I thought there was one where there was just a porch roof that's stuck in there. Am I wrong?
Between the house and the garage.
Yeah, that's the one that I.
Sorry, you're right. That was the recessed porch.
Right.
Yes. Okay. And then when it comes to sorry, just bear with me. I don't know why. It was interesting for the enclosed breezeway. This might just be easier to do it. There were 28 residents who liked it and 22 who disliked it. So again, kind of evenly split. With the porch in between, and that's what you're referring to in the other one too, we presented that option. There were 25 residents who liked it and 7 who disliked it. And then there's the visibility corridor, 14 residents liked it, 6 disliked it.
So is it just kind of wrapping it over on a high level? People seem to like being able to see space through there.
They like to see space through there, and they like the options where there's transparency. When it comes to the midlot or the mated peonia, when you're talking about bump outs or something that's protruding, those seem to be more toward the bottom. But they're kind of some things are more evenly split. You and Old Town are nothing but consistent when it comes to being split over sometimes.
Marty, another observation seems, like you said, they like the space, because there were a couple of examples there where it was kind of like a monolithic structure with bump outs or windows, and those didn't score very well.
Those were on the lower side of scoring. All right, couldn't possibly be any more controversial. Let's try. Let's try. Sorry.
I have confidence you can get more controversial.
I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry, bear with me. So the last thing we were asked to look at, and this is by no means, this is just an idea. This is not, nothing's been voted on or decided, but we were asked to look at the idea of what we call an information center. So this is where the town gate originally was, and the town gate sort of street. This is where you have the existing kind of utilitarian structure for the cemetery. We just modeled, we kind of took inspiration from the building that was demolished in the neighborhood, because I think originally there had been some discussion about relocating it. So we just showed if you were to do something, what could be done on that property. You can see we oriented the front of the building, which looks residential, toward the neighborhood, and the back side, where there would be a limited number of parking spaces, would be concealed behind it. It's a modest scaled building with just an office or flexible space, the storage, which is there now, and publicly accessible restrooms.
What is the size of it?
It's a little under 1,200 square feet.
Do we have physical evidence that's exactly where Town Gate is? Because a couple archaeologists have been up there and they say Town Gate is somewhere else. It's just a little farther to the east.
Well, that's a good question.
They showed me the coquina base of where the blockhouse, is that the right term, Alex?
Yeah.
They showed where the blockhouse is and where the coquina runs up the road and where people's graves have split because of the underlying coquina. So first of all, I want to define, is that actually where Town Gate is historically? Do we have a true grid map with footage on it? Or are we just guessing that's where Town Gate is?
I think based on the plat, showing where the blockhouses are.
And if you go by that plat, Town Gate's in a different place.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're agreed that where Town Gate is now isn't really the right place. Okay.
It might not be, no.
Okay. But no, then I agree with you, because I've seen this other evidence going, well, that makes sense too.
I don't think it's ever formally been looked at to see
People
exactly
put graves in the middle
where
of
the gate
the
was.
blockhouse, basically, is what they did around the coquina wall.
So is it between my house and garage? I'm just throwing
Not that far over, no, it shouldn't be.
It's actually up by Red Run, or what's the little road that comes across the top of the ridge? Redwood. That's, I think, where it is, because historically that would have made more sense. You never put your gate at the bottom of the hill, you put it at the top of the hill.
And the original Town Gate wasn't part of the 1811 plat, or was it?
It is.
It is part of the plat, so.
He's shaking his head no.
Well, the Town Gate.
I'll defer to Professor Tilson.
It shows up on the 1872 map.
Yeah.
1872.
So it's basically where Earl and where the, you're basically putting the house where the existing utility facility is now.
Correct.
So pick up the porta pot and the garage and plop that down.
And are those restrooms
Park in the
locked
cemetery.
or are they open?
So that would, since it's hypothetical, there's no management discussion of how it would run. But what we were thinking was it would be a restroom facility for business hours when somebody was staffing the building from our parks department who manages the cemetery, and only on weekends when there would be an active funeral and city staff would be there. So it wouldn't be where there'd be open restrooms.
So it's not a biker stop to go to the bathroom.
No, it's not any kind of tourist attraction.
It's not a homeless station
Right.
for them to go in and shoot up their heroin.
No, it will be.
Okay.
No, it's not an open building, people can go in. It would basically be an office for the management of the cemetery.
And why couldn't the bathrooms be in the storage area and the storage area be on the end?
So that could, that could all.
Again, I know it's a lot, we're showing a lot of detail. It's more of just putting the idea out there.
Yeah. So there's no plan to do this anytime in the next couple of years, but in the future, we do know that we have a need for cemetery management to be out at the cemetery. And so we're trying to think ahead of how we would fit that out
Currently, it's
there.
run out of, where is?
It's run out of the rec center.
Can I?
It's run out of
Yes.
the rec center.
We have another question, Mr. Green.
Has anybody talked to clergy about this? Because I have. I have.
Yeah, I have not.
I have, and I've asked him, I said, so, because what I'm hearing is a visitor center, is what I'm hearing. Well, visitor center to me is all your tourists, and I asked him, I said, how do you feel about that, And he said, how on earth am I going to conduct a respectful funeral with people running all over a cemetery? I said, well, you have to ask the city. I'm just throwing that out there.
So that's not the intention of what this is at all.
But the intention of what may happen.
This would be where the cemetery manager would have an office where they sell the plots. Currently, if somebody wants to go see the plots, city staff goes out and meets them out there and has to set an appointment. This way, this would be the location where someone could go to purchase a
So
plot of land.
basically, we're just building her an office up there?
So it would have, in that office flexible space, there would be interpretive displays and things so that people are waiting.
So it is a visitor center then. I want to.
It's an information center, so most
I'm trying to clear
cemeteries.
this up, because if people want to know about Old Town, they should be going to the plaza and looking at a braille thing that's available to people that are
Yeah.
blind and deaf and all that kind of stuff. If you're now trying to find a reason to build an office for someone, then just call it an office and make it. I agree.
It's
The
got multiple
cemetery needs
functions.
an office.
Yeah. So
But I'm having a hard time saying, people come into Old Town, they stop there to get their pamphlet, they get their little thing, let's figure out where to go, when we should just drive them to the plaza.
this is less about Old Town and a visitor center than it is the cemetery. And if somebody is looking for their loved one's grave, there's somebody there that they can go to.
I want to find my family member.
Exactly. It will still have some interpretive that discusses this parcel is between, it's both the cemetery and Old Town. And so acknowledging that is important. And so we didn't want to just put it there as the cemetery and not acknowledge that it's part of Old Town.
How many cemeteries do the city maintain?
This is the only city maintained cemetery.
So I have a comment more than a question. I mean, it's a city-run cemetery, it's not a church-run cemetery, but it sounds like it's a little less a visitor center and a little more like a sexton's house. The keeper of the cemetery, it's because the city keeps the cemetery, they're gonna have someone on site during business hours.
So then why would we need bathrooms?
Because
They have to go to bed.
So you only need one for the sexton.
Right now, if there's a funeral,
It's a city
there's,
thing, and
yeah. Yeah, right now it's an amenity that is not there. So if you're having a funeral, there is no restroom out there except for the porta potty. So that's why it would be open, we think it would be open during a funeral or during business hours when this building was staffed.
And there's no space for a true cemetery information center over where we want to do the columbarium or all that kind of stuff, where it's centrally located in the cemetery, and someone can say, you want to go to that block over there, or this block over here, or that block over there.
It could be located in two other places. This being that intersection between Old Town and the cemetery, that's why that work shed was put out there years ago. That's where they determined that the city functions would be.
We're gonna put a visitor center on a road that the city's abandoned. Again, so that means now we're gonna have to redo Cimarellis and straighten it up.
Abandoned road.
Well, if you go to the city utilities office, they have a big blue circle around it that says abandoned road.
Cimarellis has never been abandoned.
I agree, there's a discrepancy in that, but again, we're gonna have to fix Cimarellis then. We're gonna have to take out a bunch of trees to straighten the road up to make it handicap accessible.
So the building could be accessed from the existing road
So we want
into
it
the
to just be on
cemetery.
Magnolia, basically.
Yeah, there's no, I don't see that we would bring traffic in through Old Town to get to this.
Oh, we know that they're gonna leave and go right down the dirt road to go see what you've now told them to go see. So I just wanna make sure we're thinking of how we have to redevelop that, and one, does the city have the money to do it?
No, currently right now, there is no plan to do this. This was just all hypothetical discussion so that in the future, when this does come up, that we already kind of have talked about it and kind of have some ideas and hear what the
Just so everyone
concerns are.
knows, we live right there, so obviously we're more concerned about it. I wanna be upfront about that.
Sorry?
Where's the two other places that you spoke of?
So it can't go in any platted section of the cemetery, because being the age of the cemetery it is, there are lots of unmarked graves there. So really right now there's only one, which would be where that discussion of putting a columbarium would be. That's an unplatted section of the cemetery.
That is where?
It's in the kind of the center of the new section. Nassau Street and
the bump out.
Where are we moving the garage to, the current maintenance garage?
That would be part of this discussion. Right now, there's a reorganization being discussed within the city about the maintenance of the building, maintenance of the cemetery, and whether that gets contracted out or whether that stays on site. So,
How much more land is usable there as far as
for plots or for something like
for
this?
future graves?
I believe there are just under 1,000 graves still available.
So we still have much land left for thousands.
Well, when you say that we were asked to do this, who asked us?
So, as the planning department, we're supposed to be projecting into the future and projecting the future needs of the city. So that's why we're having a discussion now, rather than wait until it becomes an issue where we need something to go out there and something just gets hastily done, the cemetery is important to me as a historic resource, as is Old Town, and I don't want to see anything happen out there that hasn't been well thought out and had public input and,
So you just read this up?
My last concern.
So we're always looking into the future to figure out, if we were gonna do something, where would it be? And so while we've had this discussion about Old Town, this was a good time to throw it out there.
And I think I think what I would like to just talk about, kind of wrap it up, and we're still here to have conversations, but I think next steps are obviously based on outcomes today, this report that will get issued, and this will be part of that, and there will be an opportunity to review that report and to share your comments on that. We'll also be developing this kind of more visually simpler guide, right, for the guidelines for Old Town, so that could get shared as well. And we can get input on both of those documents. It covers everything that we talked about tonight, from guideline updates to the coastal resilience study to this particular idea of having an information center at the cemetery. So
One last comment. Have we confirmed that there are no graves there? Because unfortunately we have a dog and he dug up a human bone right on the road, right on the line of where the shed is. And we had a whole thing, they came in, archaeologists buried it again, but I just get really nervous about us digging around there and finding stuff we don't want to find.
Yeah, so and there's always the possibility that there are graves out there. And so anything that would be undertaken out there would have an archaeologist on site and a full study. Yeah, we're not just, it's the same reason, we're not going out and just planting trees in the cemetery just willy-nilly without a plan, because you just can't dig holes out there.
And we'll certainly make the recommendation. I've done it in a lot of cemeteries pretty recently, and one in Archer, Florida. You can use ground penetrating radar. Florida Public Archaeology Network uses it, and it's a great way to determine if there's unmarked graves.
Tim, to your point there, a comment you made about the cemetery up there and talking to clergy and all that. I know I've gone over to that cemetery and walked around just to enjoy the serenity of that. It's beautiful. And you bring up an extremely good point. And, I think it's good for us to chew on this a little bit and think about it, but, as neighbors near there, yeah, it's connected, to your point, Bob, artifacts that could become. I know where I grew up, there was good-sized cemeteries, and we didn't have to have an office or a visitor center, if you will, at the cemetery. I've attended many funerals down there with people of all ages, and I never remember it being really necessary to have a restroom there, because you're going there for the service for a certain amount of time, and also people planned accordingly.
Yeah, it just does not make sense to me
I'm
at all.
kind of really
But
skeptical.
That cemetery needs so much work. Why don't we invest the money in making it look better? I just don't understand it. We're gonna put a building there for somebody to sit there in an office?
Yeah,
It just infuriates me. It really does, because I see, and the next time I see somebody drive down that road when I'm running and they're having sex in the back of the truck, or they're shooting up heroin, then I'll take the pictures and put it all over the media for Old Town. That we have the cemetery in Fernandina. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It really is infuriating.
If I can just address one of those things, so that has been recognized as an issue out there.
Yeah, and I've lived there for 2 years, Sal.
This is one of those ways. There's no presence in the cemetery.
Let's put a fence back there.
There's no one there.
And
If there
that's
were
why
more
I'm
people
saying,
on
if you
site-
can put a person there from 9 to 5, it's still not gonna take the issue.
They come in at 5:30.
Yeah, they come in.
They come in at dusk. They do their drug deal in the back,
And the
downtown.
homeless in the backwoods where the coyotes live, the whole thing.
It's ridiculous.
If you really want to do security, then you put a nice wrought iron looking fence around it like a cemetery downtown.
And gates.
It's across from my house. I see it firsthand. Okay? And it is. I wish they would put something up there, because it wasn't but 3 weeks ago, a car went down in there. He was down there for 3.5 hours with
And
his
who's
lights
gonna-
on.
Right.
And a bicycle came through, okay, about an hour after the car was down there, And then the same bicycle came back through again, and I said to this guy, I said, that car's still down there? And he said, yeah. And it happened to be a cop. He said, if I was you, I would call the cops. I said, well, you know, I said, that's just kind of weird. I mean, why do you go sit in the cemetery for 3.5 hours? And I can stand on a porch and smell the pot. I can care less if they smoke pot, you know, but I just think it's disrespectful to do it in a cemetery. You know, I mean, I really do. And, you know, and if you're down there having sex, go get a room. They just built a new hotel up there.
And any other neighbor, if you want it there, then let's put it all in, you know, in your backyard. Because put your feet in my shoes. I don't want to be, I spent so much money of my hard-working life to build that house. And then to have that back there, that just,
They already put the lift station in our yard.
well, that's fine. But, you know, I'm sorry, but it just.
Well, it's just old now, what the hell?
I want to add that the same thing goes on at the end of Estrada in the paper mill park. I've called the law to go down there several times, and they've taken people out of there, and, you know, there's a little prostitution going on down there, lots of drug deals, a couple cars burned, always a fist fight between somebody, shots fired. How do we close that back off? Or close it at dark? But this happens in the daytime also. You know, I have a few houses right there, and I see it all the time, and, you know, I got teenage boys who, you know, I don't want them seeing that stuff. You know, it was done, you know, maybe it was a good idea for, you know, but when I come home one day, there's a car burning to the ground in it, and all the neighbors are watching. Hey, look down there. You know, nothing's good's happening out there in those little cubby holes. Wouldn't be a bad idea to, I mean, if it can't close, but, you know, make it so that dark it closes. You know, cemetery, they got lots more places to hide.
So I will say those are all really good suggestions and observations. And please, definitely, if you see any of that, please report it, because the police need to know.
I handle it when I see it, but you know what? I don't want to have to be I don't want to be the security guard.
So I would love everybody to get more involved in the cemetery. I don't control the cemetery. Marty doesn't control the cemetery. But these are good things. You guys are adjacent. You guys are right there and seeing that. To let the police department know, or, you know, if you want to have a meeting, you know, with the Historic District Council, they don't control the cemetery, but if you wanted to come to a public meeting, or you wanted to speak at a city commission meeting and let these concerns be known, they don't know what's going on. They don't live next to it. And so that's where the idea of the visitor center was, to have a presence in the cemetery. And I get your concerns about it.
So I was told by a policeman, if you have a fishing pole in your hand and a fishing license in your pocket, you're allowed to carry a gun. That's the safety they gave us. They said you can discharge a firearm in the city of Fernandina as long as you have a fishing pole in one hand and a fishing license in your pocket. So if the police is telling us that's how we take safety, I have a problem with safety versus a visitor center right now.
And but they're different issues, but they need to be addressed because those are important concerns. So if you're not getting the answers that you want, I definitely recommend attending one of the city commission meetings and speaking, or letting one of us know so that we can forward on those messages.
Well, we're letting you know.
I think you might know.
Right now, we're letting you know.
I just want to point out though that when I, as the historic preservation planner, bring that to them, it doesn't carry as much weight as coming from a citizen.
Right. We understand.
So, and can so I'm gonna wrap this up, and again, I've stated what I think the next steps are. I think my I've got quite a few observations, but I'll share a couple. I think one is that historic preservation is not about like freezing things in time. It's about managing change. And that's what's going on here, and it's been going on. You've had a lot of change in 20 years. 55 houses, how many new ones are on? That's an extreme amount of change in one neighborhood. You've got some people who've been there for a very long time, and you have some that are new. The other thing that's happening here sometimes is a clash in values, because what historic preservation represents is values, what you value about a neighborhood. And they're all valid, right? There's not one. So I appreciate you all coming and sharing your values and what you like and what you'd like to see improved about the neighborhood. And I appreciate you all I can say is encourage you all. It seems like you're a pretty tight-knit community that continue to work together to make sure that, and respect each other's values, because there's obviously different opinions in this room. But I think all I keep going back to is from the first time I stepped in that neighborhood, it's special. You wouldn't be living there if it wasn't. And I commend, again, Professor Tilson, the guidelines. I'm not saying it's time to revisit them. But in my opinion, architecturally, and I am an architect as well as a preservationist, I think that the neighborhood has really got some amazing character. So thank you for letting me be a part of the process.
And Marty, we commend you for managing
all this.
the motley crew. You've done a great job.
Yes, thank you very much.